They happen to be my views, and Sydney, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Bob Chapman from the International Forecaster as we begin analyzing what indeed is going on at the present time, because, of course, there's so much intentional confusion out there. Right now, of course, if you watch what's going on in Europe, it looks like Greece is on the verge of insolvency, that Spain is on the verge of insolvency, that Ireland and Iceland are on the verge of insolvency, and Great Britain isn't a great deal better off than that. But then we get by a lot longer because our currency is the reserve currency of the world, but you can't keep simply printing money and Weimarizing our monetary system without eventually getting into problems. And then, of course, what is really going on today? Sydney, President Obama says he is so dedicated to getting jobs in America and getting the banks lending again. Well, the banks have lots of money. But the banks are part of a cabal that is intent upon breaking down the monetary structure of our communities and this nation. You can't have an industrialized society unless you have credit available, and they are intentionally withholding credit. And, of course, the smaller banks are being paid not to lend money. Doesn't President Obama understand what the Federal Reserve System is doing? Doesn't he understand that there is an organized effort to transfer America's wealth and jobs and factories to other countries? Well, perhaps Bob can answer some of these questions as he does so well in the International Forecaster. What he simply points out, as he does repeatedly, what is going on is not accidental. It was all planned that way. Is that right, Bob?
It certainly is.
Well, you pick up.
And, I hear that litany and all those terrible things. Going back to what you were talking about, you named a few countries there, but we have to include the United States and Portugal, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, Hungary, and that's just for openers. These are the ones we know have deficits to GDP of, I would say, 75% or higher. The 75 to 125% of GDP, and it's growing exponentially. And of course, you hear the European Central Bank say to Greece, "What are you going to do this, that, and the other thing?" They don't say anything to anybody else in the Eurozone, and the media makes no attention to all of those other countries that got problems. They're all doing the same thing. They all increased their money supply endlessly for 6.5 years, almost 7 now, at an average rate of 14%. It varied from country to country. And now they've got it down, generally speaking, to around 6%, which has been normal in recent years. And so that is how the banking systems have cut down the amount of, perhaps excessive amount of, liquidity in the system. They haven't told anybody about that.
Well, we're
going to figure out why, because it would, it'd be good for something for them to say. But look what we did.
Right, we're going to be back in just a moment with Bob Chapman, right here at Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Christian Bob Chapman was just saying that Paul Volcker, who actually, I don't necessarily like Paul Volcker, but he did what was right back in 1980 and saved the dollar. Right now, he's talking about we've got to do away with these banks that are too big to collapse. He says you've got to eliminate these banks because, if they're too big to collapse, they'll bring down the whole system sooner or later. You've got to restrict their size and power and allow these things to go bankrupt. If you don't, why, everything will be lost. And then, of course, Bob was just saying that the Republican Central Committee has been bribing the senators to vote for Bernanke, who, of course, is the head of the Fed. But you see the whole idea that there's not a dime's worth of difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. Bernanke has been serving the Democrats for the last year, but as Republicans want to keep him in, the Democrat leaderships want to keep him in because he's doing the bidding of the invisible government and keeping this thing going for a short period of time until they bring the whole house of cards down. Well, pick up the story there, Bob.
Right. It just shows the commonality of interest of both parties, both of which are almost totally controlled by the Brotherhood of Darkness. And, there's no question that the public has to be catching on, especially when 70% of them wanted to see the Fed get audited. And now I understand that in the Senate all kinds of money is being passed around to make sure that that section of that bill is deleted. And who's behind it, which is Dodd, who is not running for re-election. And my guess is they probably, are going to give him 50 or 100 million to stop this thing. And, of course, he'll bow out of politics with several $100 million, which he gets to keep. And the whole thing is just criminally rotten. It's irretrievable under the present circumstances. And I just see it tending toward no good end. I hope the public is able to get rid of most of the people who are incumbents in office in the next election, and we can get an audit of the Fed. If we don't get either of them, you can forget it. It's over.
Well, I really believe, of course, that these are exciting times. There is a growing movement all across America. We're certainly in Alabama. Judge Roy Moore is really running out 20 points, 25 points above his closest competitors. Certainly there's people are running all across this country who believe in states' rights, who believe in the Constitution, who believe we are a republic, not a democracy. I have never seen, and I've been at this for 47 years, almost as long as Bob, I've never seen a reaction like we're having today. People know something's wrong. Oh, yes, some of them don't know. Some of them don't care. Some of them don't want to believe. But I think there's a growing awareness, despite the Jesse Ventura's programs woke up, literally millions of people. I hope they get back on again. But what we need to do is utilize the facilities that we have to bring out the truth, and that there really are people at the highest levels of our government who have a different worldview. Their loyalty is not to America. They're globalists, and they really don't want to bring down this government and destroy our economy. But behind them are powerful spiritual forces. If you don't understand that, none of it makes sense. Well, Bob, certainly what is happening as far as I can see, why we're still losing jobs. We're still having more and more people losing their homes. About 300,000 people a month certainly are losing their homes. Why? It looks to me like, of course, there's going to be another collapse of the housing market. Things seem to be stabilizing, but they talk about a double-dip bottom. Well, I can just see the next dip down being even worse than it has been. I was in Southern California this last weekend, and you drive it through Ontario, very upper-class neighborhoods, and you see all these commercial buildings, and they're all empty, and they've been built on borrowed money, and they're certainly going to go back to the banks. In fact, when this is all over, the borrowers, or I should say the big money people, are going to own most of the industrialized property, most of the commercial property in this country, and an awful lot of the housing. This is the way it looks to me. What are your thoughts?
I wrote an article 7 years ago, and it said that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were broke. And it was the intention of the government to own all of the homes that were purchased on time. Now, that is about 47% of the homes. 53% are outright owned. And of course, when people die, that figure will probably become smaller unless the house is inherited within the family and they don't sell it. And what the government's trying to do is own as much housing as possible so that they can control people. It's the same thing with this medical care and other programs of the government. Everything is people control. And, I must say I go to a number of different countries, and none of them are doing anything like this. None of them. Of course, that's throughout Latin America, but it is going on in England and some of the countries in Europe. But I find it difficult under the circumstances